Welcome everybody, and welcome to our Zoom chat, whether you're joining us on Facebook or you're watching the recording of this, or you joined also on Zoom here. So anyway you're looking at this, welcome to everybody. And tonight, I should say, we're going to be going over how to observe Rosh Hashanah in an age of COVID. So what does that mean, and what are some of the leniencies, what are some of the restrictions? I think we all know about restrictions by now. And how do I do this all by myself? Some of you are going to be all by yourselves for maybe even the first time ever. And some of you are going to be away from communities, and you're going to have all the anxiety that's going to be, we're used to basically getting on the bus. We get on the bus, and then kind of the community drives us down the street to our destination of where we're going, and then we get off the bus, and there you go. But this time you're the one driving the bus, right? And so let's go ahead and take some of the anxiety away, and let's talk about simplifying everything. So that's really what I want to go ahead and do tonight. So I have a couple different sources that I'm going to show you first off, for places that you can get some help and some guidelines and some guidance, etc., and learn some about the laws and all these kinds of things. And so let's go ahead and share my screen here. And so first of all, you can definitely look at Beth Emanuel. So Beth Emanuel, obviously, from the beginning, I should say, let's take a look here in the news section. I think you just go to the home page, actually, and there might be a slider. Yeah, there we go. So you can always get a lot of very good information here. And so that will go ahead and be very helpful. And you can click on Rosh Hashanah, I think it is. Maybe not. Oh yeah, I think this is for all the holidays. So you can listen to some helpful lectures to get you in the mood, etc. Of course, that's one of the areas, how to celebrate Rosh Hashanah. I think that will give you some good places to go. It has a link to the Rosh Hashanah menu, which we'll talk about that in a moment. Are two heads better than one? Why we celebrate Rosh Hashanah for 2 days, even in the diaspora, and actually even in Israel itself, even in Jerusalem. And so we're not going to cover any of those things because, as you can see, you can read right there about some of those issues right there. So tonight we're going to just cover the basics, and like I said before, try and go ahead and ease anxieties, etc. So let's go ahead and take a look at just a couple of those things that were mentioned. So what is Rosh Hashanah? So this is a very helpful article by Aaron Eby. And so I think, whoops, pressed the wrong button. I think this is a very good place to start. This is probably very much a review for a lot of you guys, but let's go ahead and look at it anyways. We're not going to be going over the whole article, just highlighting a few points. So essentially, Rosh Hashanah means head of the year. And so the sages ask, why is it not Rishit Hashanah? Why isn't it the beginning of the year? Actually, it's the head of the year. And the answer really is because the head, just like the head drives the whole body, without your head, you don't have a body. You can live without certain organs of your body or without limbs, but you can definitely not live without a head. So in the same way, Rosh Hashanah is really the head of the year. Now, I know what some of you are saying, wait a second, Rosh Hashanah is actually the 7th month. I read the Bible and it talks about it's in the 7th month in Leviticus 23. So what is going on here? How could this be the new year? And much less, how do we get all this idea of judgment, etc.? Well, that's actually a very easy thing to talk about in one fell swoop. It's not even different topics. It's really just all one topic. And the reason why is because what we're talking about here is we're talking about the yearly agricultural cycle. I'm not sure where this link's going to lead me. Yeah, it leads me here to Rosh Hashanah being the new year. Is Rosh Hashanah the new year? So this article. And so basically, let's see if he links it here. He might not cite it. I'm super familiar with this article. I'm just kind of scanning through. Essentially, nope, he doesn't cite it right there, but I'll go ahead and cite it for you. So a couple verses before the Shema, the second paragraph of the Shema. So the Shema is broken into 3 paragraphs, and it's actually, this isn't a class on Deuteronomy, but I'll just go ahead and add really quickly. The whole book of Deuteronomy is a couple speeches of Moses, and the longest speech starts in chapter 6 all the way to chapter 26. Well, that speech, that long speech from 6 to 26, is actually broken into two sections. The first section starting in chapter 6 and ending right before chapter 12. And so it's very interesting because in chapter 6, you have the first paragraph of the Shema, and chapter 11, at the end, towards the end of chapter 11, you have the second paragraph of the Shema. Well, just a couple of verses right before that, it says, Eine Hashem el eretz ba me reshit hashana ad acharit hashana. And you might hear the reshit hashana sounds like Rosh Hashanah. And indeed, Rosh Hashanah is just a nickname, really. But what that verse is telling you is that the eyes of Hashem are on the land of Israel from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So we now know that we have 2-year cycles. The first yearly cycle is in November. Is in, excuse me, with Exodus about Passover, and the second yearly cycle, at least that the Bible talks about, is an agricultural cycle. So if you think about it, we have no crops, if we have no water, if we have no rain in many parts of the world, people starve. So there really everything is dependent upon it. It's dependent upon farming and depending upon resources and crops, etc., food production, all that. So you can see that the agricultural cycle really runs the world, and so life and death really is actually judged during this time of the agricultural cycle. So that's one source we see Rosh Hashanah. But where is the second source we see Rosh Hashanah being a time of judgment? Well, if I were to ask you, what are the biblical holidays? What are the holidays in the Bible? And you say, oh, well, you'd rattle them off. Passover, good. Sukkot, sure. Shavuot, good. Rosh Hashanah, let's stop. If I look in the very first place that it lists biblical holidays, there's 3. Passover, Sukkot, Passover, Shavuot, I'll say them in order, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Feast of the feast of feast of unleavened bread, the feast of weeks, and the feast of booths, right? Or tabernacles, however you want to say it in English. And so that's it. The Bible really considers 3 holidays, and in fact, we have Shalosh Regalim. We have 3 pilgrimage holidays. So where do we get all these other holidays from? Well, that's a good question. And as we're looking through Israel's history, we see that really comes from the first national tragedy. What is the first national tragedy in Israel's history? The sin of the golden calf. Israel had just become a nation, and all of a sudden, what could this be compared to? You can imagine such a thing. Somebody getting married, and under the chuppah, they're cheating on their spouse that they just married. This is essentially what happened with Israel nationally. They had just received the Torah, just had this monumentous, life-changing, world-changing, history-changing experience, and right at the foot of the mountain, they cheated on God, so to speak, with the golden calf. So after that, God pronounces a time of judgment, and so obviously he wants to wipe the people out. You might know the story. Moses intervenes on our behalf, and God then says something in chapter 32 or 34 of Exodus. I'll put the notes down here in the description to this video once I convert it to a YouTube video, that there's a time that although God is going to forgive us, there's going to be a little measure of judgment that's going to be happening at every cycle. And so our sages tell us that actually when Moses came down with the second tablets, right, take 2 tablets and call me in the morning. And when he came down with the second tablets, that actually that day was Yom Kippur. So you can see, obviously, the time period. And I can go ahead and show you all of that. I will put a link down here to a very helpful timeline, a graphic timeline on a site, Hebrew for Christians. Kind of a funny site. I don't recommend everything that's on that site. I don't agree with everything that would be on that site, but it's a very helpful graphic nonetheless. So the idea here is that there's an annual day of judgment that comes from whether there are going to be good crops or bad crops, whether there's going to be rain or no rain, flooding, etc., whether there's going to be insects. Who knows exactly what's going to happen with our food source that really is going to drive the entire world. That's one source. And the other source of judgment we have, it really comes from after Israel's first national tragedy. Now, there are many tragedies in Israel previous, but our national tragedy that the nation was complicit in was the sin of the golden calf. And God's speaking to Moses, saying that there's going to be a little bit of judgment that's going to still, a residue of judgment that's still going to remain. And so what happens is put those two things together, and this really is a day where God, we're begging for our lives. We just went through, a year, or maybe not a year of COVID, but pretty much almost a year of COVID, definitely over half a year. This invisible thing that nobody can see, but everybody's feeling the effects of. The whole entire world got turned upside down by something that we can't see with the naked eye, that we can perceive the effects of it, etc. We can use other instruments outside of our natural bodies to go ahead and see it. Well, that's how it is with the Holy One, who we can't see, the invisible God, if you will, who we can't see with the naked eye unless he wants us to, but we could definitely use external tools to go ahead on, which things like prayer, things like study through his revelation, through the word, things like being in community with others, etc., that we know that he exists, looking around at nature, etc. And so just in the same way that really God has allowed this thing that we can't see to turn the whole entire world upside down, topple economies, topple almost governments. Well, we really see that we're begging for our lives because our lives are not guaranteed to us. So that's essentially what we're talking about. Now, we're not talking about salvation. We're not talking about salvation on a national level with Israel's salvation. We're not talking about salvation on a personal level, at least not a spiritual salvation. But we're talking in terms of our ultimate destiny in the afterlife. That's not what we're talking about. And sometimes people confuse these two things, but our ultimate destinies is not really what we're praying for. We're praying for the ability to, number one, have another year of life physically on this earth, but number two, to have a better resurrection in the world to come. This is what Shaul says in one of his letters. He says that we're praying, in the book of Hebrews, not Shaul's letters. The book of Hebrews says that we're going through suffering in order to have a better resurrection, a better seat in the afterlife, if you will. So all of that aside, let's go ahead and get down to practicalities. So again, this goes through a little bit of the theory and the scriptural sources of what Rosh Hashanah is. It talks about Rosh Hashanah in terms of the apostles, and obviously you have different places in the writings of the letters of Paul and the Gospels where you have all these themes, and definitely very heavy in the first letter to the Corinthians and the first letter to the Thessalonians, and also the revelation of our Master Yeshua through the book of Revelation. But let's go ahead and take a look now at, like I said, the practical nitty-gritty. So there are two things that I want to go ahead and look at. So the first is this site right here, Chabad. You might be familiar with it. So Chabad is not a Messianic organization. Well, they are Messianic, but the wrong Messiah, if you will. But it's very, very helpful in that they're a missionary organization in some sense in terms of reaching out to unaffiliated Jews. So they're Orthodox Jews reaching out to unaffiliated Jews. Now, how does that help for our purposes? Well, what they want to do is they want to publicize the most helpful ways to go ahead and observe holidays and observe different parts and facets of the Bible. And so that's really helpful for us, being that it's in the Ethernet and it's out there on the internet, that we can go ahead and take advantage from the vast knowledge that this website really gives us. And so you see, obviously, right off to the side, High Holidays, COVID resources, and there's a bunch of things right here, a little bit about the holidays, and we'll just go through this really quickly. So on a more mystical level, we understand that Rosh Hashanah is also the celebration of the creation of Adam and Eve. And so we'll talk a little bit about that mysticism that's held in that a little bit later. But for now, we can go through this and see that it's celebrated as the head of the Jewish year. It begins on sundown All Jewish holidays begin at sundown, and then it's the September 18th, so it's just a couple days away. It's tomorrow, and it ends on the 2nd of Tishrei, the September 20th. So from Friday evening all the way to Sunday. The central observance, Rosh Hashanah, is blowing the shofar. We'll talk about that on mornings of the holiday, except on Shabbat. So we'll also talk about that, which is normally done in synagogue as part of the day's services, but may be done elsewhere for those who cannot attend services. That's really, really important, and we'll get to that in a moment. Rosh Hashanah feasts traditionally include round challah. They don't have to, that's just, as you read here, a tradition. And apples dipped in honey, we'll get to that. And other foods to symbolize our wishes for a sweet year. Other Rosh Hashanah observances include candlelighting in the evenings and desisting from creative work. And see, all of these are clickable links for more information. You can go ahead and click on any of these to get more information. But I think most of you watching this already kind of have some idea of what we're talking about here. Together with Yom Kippur, which follows 10 days later, it's part of what's called the Yamim Nara'im, the days of awe. So what I really want to get to is all of these high holidays and COVID resources. So let's go ahead and go through some of these. And I think these are going to be very, very helpful. And so since the coronavirus, which is very interesting, we call this what? COVID-19, we call it the coronavirus. Well, corona in Latin means a crown. And the idea of Rosh Hashanah is that we're crowning the king. More on that later. So 8 tips for an amazing Rosh Hashanah at home. So it basically just talks a little bit about preparing. 14 tips for an amazing Yom Kippur. That's obviously a little bit. So the first area that I want to get to is that I want to look at is really right here, the order of the prayers for Rosh Hashanah. Now, if you had a Chabad Sidur, I think I pressed the wrong thing. I did. So if you had a Chabad Sidur that's published, obviously by this organization, you would be able to go ahead and follow the page numbers. But either way, for those who have a little bit more knowledge, you might recognize some of these Hebrew terms in transliteration, but I'm going to go over with them with you, translating them to English, etc. So every single day we have 3 daily prayers, and they're commemorating the different times of offerings in the temple, and so we're really living the rhythm of the temple every single day. Now, of course, this is not including all of our personal petitions, our personal extemporaneous prayer, the personal prayer that we have. So the first prayer that we're going to focus on is the afternoon or mincha prayer. And so there are a couple different things. So first off, these are some extra things over here, as well as these right here. Let me go ahead and talk about this. So you have the Ashrae Psalm 145, with a couple verses before that from Psalms 88 and 89, etc. Now, one big thing is we do not say Tachanun. What's Tachanun? Tachanun is some penitential prayer. So essentially being in the rhythm with this prayer, we're not going to, at a prayer time close to Rosh Hashanah, we're not going to ask for our own personal petitions. Because the reason why is really that even though Rosh Hashanah is a time of judgment, what we're really doing is we're easing into the celebration of the festival. Why? Because we're confident that Hashem that Hashem, the Lord, will go ahead and give us a good, favorable judgment. So one thing I want to go ahead and show you here also is there is, after we say the Amidah is the standing prayer, and we're going to say the normal Amidah, the normal weekday Amidah. We would say this Psalm, Le David Hashem Ori, which is Psalm 27, and then we would say the Aleinu, that hymn. We're saying it's up to us to go ahead and propagate the kingship of God, etc. And then we would light candles. So let's go ahead and take a look at the candle lighting. Now, if you have this book, unfortunately, this book does not contain the Rosh Hashanah candle lighting, except it really does. Now, let's go ahead and take a look here. There's only one small change to the actual candlelighting blessing. So if you have the custom to say the candlelighting blessing, it would go something like this: Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, and then whether you say Asher Kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'hadlik, whether you want to say that section, obviously is depending upon your custom. I don't recommend it for Gentiles, but and one is allowed to go ahead and skip that in prayers. There's certain times of the year and certain situations where we do skip sections like that. Lahadlik ner shel Shabbat is what we normally say every Sabbath. But here, lahadlik ner shel Shabbat, because obviously tomorrow night is going to be Shabbat, beshel yom hazikaron. So in English, it has commanded us to kindle a lamp for the Sabbath and for the day of remembrance. So that's really all that needs to happen. There needs to be just one simple addition that really you can just write in to your venture as if you're using this, or if you're using a normal Siddur, a Machzor, a high holiday prayer book, then it will have that in there. So then you're going to say Shechachianu. So Shechachianu is a special prayer that is telling us, that is commemorating the fact that we have lived. Here it is at the bottom of page 4 and 5 in this book right here, Shulchan Shabbat, the Sabbath table. And the bottom of page 4 and 5, it says, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has kept us alive, upheld us, and let us reach this time." So that's a very, very important and powerful blessing this year, because there's many people who have not reached this time, and unfortunately, a lot of them we know. So that's what's happening for the candlelighting blessing. Now, a couple different things here that I want to talk about. So first off, the candlelighting blessing is going to be the same on Friday night and on Saturday night. So the Friday night blessing should be done before the evening, and the Saturday night blessing should be done from an existing flame, but it needs to be completely dark out, especially if you're a Jewish person, to go ahead and commemorate the laws and rituals of and honor the laws and rituals of Shabbat, that it needs to make sure that Shabbat is completely over. It needs to be completely dark. So probably around 8:30 in this part of the world, you can go ahead and there's various places where you can check the times, etc., for candle lighting, and you can indeed use this site, Chabad.org, right here. And so what you're going to do is you're going to say the same blessing, except not Shel Shabbat, because Saturday night obviously is not Shabbat anymore. You're going to say Shel Yom Zikaron, of the day of remembrance. And you will say another Shechachianu prayer, another prayer of thanking God to let us reach this time. However, the custom is to go ahead and have some kind of new fruit. That's going to be something that you haven't had in this season. And that would also kind of give you a little bit of a bolster of saying this prayer, because the idea is that, well, we already said it last night, so is this really a new holiday for us? So it comes out that if you don't have a new fruit, if you forgot one, that's fine, you can still say it. However, it's preferable to have a new fruit. Let's go ahead and look down here now to the evening prayer service. So the evening prayer service is usually on Friday evenings, preceded by what's known as Kabbalat Shabbat. Nothing to do with the Kabbalah. Kabbalah just means to receive. So receiving the Shabbat. And so this can be compared to maybe some dignitary or a queen who's coming to visit a particular nation. And as she gets out the plane, gets out of the car, there's a whole band, there's song, there's dancing, there's everything to welcome this dignitary. Well, it's in the same way we're welcoming this dignitary into our homes, into our synagogues, wherever we might be. Now, typically there's a whole host of psalms that we would sing out very joyously, but however, because of the holiday and the kind of competing nature of the holiday, which is a festival, we're going to go ahead and truncate that a little bit. So we're going to say 3 psalms and then 1 hymn. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Right here, let's go ahead and talk about the transliteration of all these words, and then I'll go ahead and relate that to which psalms those are. So it's Psalm Mizmor LeDavid, a song of David, which is Psalm 29. Lecha Dodi, that's the hymn. Now, what about if you don't know Lecha Dodi, or you don't have Lecha Dodi? It's something that is purely custom to go ahead and do in Kabbalat Shabbat. And in fact, many of the great sages, all the way from, as recent as just 1,000 years ago, didn't have that hymn. So it's definitely something that can be skipped if you don't have it. Mizmor Shir LeYom HaShabbat, so a song for the Sabbath day, and this is all holidays are actually called a Sabbath in the Bible. And so this would be Psalm 92, and then you would do Psalm 93 as well, and that would be the proper receiving of Shabbat that also falls on a holiday. Let's go ahead and take a look a little bit more here now. So those people that do not have a quorum, do not have a minyan, would skip Baruch Hu and all those things that need to be said in a quorum of people. And it says the king, the glory of the king, is magnified amongst the people. And so there's certain prayers that we're going to say only when we have a quorum. And Baruch Hu, the opening blessing for our services, our evening services, is definitely one of them. Obviously, also in the morning as well. And so you're going to say the Shema with its blessings if you have those, and the Amidah, which is a particular Rosh Hashanah Amidah. And so this, unfortunately, if you just have a normal Siddur, you won't be able to go ahead and find the Amidah in that normal Siddur. You do need to get a special machzor, a special high holiday prayer book or a holiday prayer book. But you are actually very fortunate because I have something that it would be very simple for any of you to print out that I'll show you in just a moment. And it's very also user friendly, thank God. And so now the only difference here is that they're typically in the ArchGold published Siddur or the Chabad published Siddur, or I believe it's this way also in the Koran published Siddur and many other Siddurim that you would use. There usually are some kind of indications of insertions that we would add in the Rosh Hashanah special Amidah, which are gray box inserts for Shabbat. Mostly these can be skipped if you don't have them or you forget them, but however, there are some that if you don't say them, you would need to repeat the Amidah. One other thing that's really important here in this box is the the third paragraph of the Amidah, talking about the holiness of the day. Really, we want to go ahead and recognize God as our King. And that's one of the themes of Rosh Hashanah, as we talked about before, the sovereign one being the one that we pay all our allegiance to, just as you can think back in Mount Sinai, so to speak, cheating on God was because he's our sovereign. We owe him allegiance. We owe him all of our entire lives. And so on Rosh Hashanah, one of the themes is the kingship of God, Malchut HaShamayim, Malchut Hashem. And so we, unfortunately, if in the third blessing we change a little bit the wordings from Hamelech Ha'el HaKadosh, the holy God, to Hamelech HaKadosh. Now, I have a YouTube video on this that goes a little bit more into depth. I'll go ahead and link that in the description once this gets turned into a YouTube video as well. We will say the section from Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 and 3, I think, 1 to 3, I think it is, speaking about the heavens and the earth being created, etc. And then we will go ahead and say a psalm, the David Mizmor, which is Psalm, let's see here, which psalm is that? I'm blanking out on that psalm, that's fine. We would say Mizmor David, it's the David Mizmor, I'm sorry, Psalm 24, which is a special Rosh Hashanah psalm. And then we're going to say Psalm 23, and we'll end with Elenu and Lashana Tovah. Let's go ahead and focus now on the Kiddush, and then we'll go ahead and get to the day, and we'll talk about that. So let's talk about the ritual of the Kiddush first, and then we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about the evening and how it goes. So we would say the two hymns, Shalom Aleichem, welcoming the angels that have ushered us into the end of the week, into the Sabbath. And that's obviously because tomorrow night will be Shabbat, and both Shabbat and Rosh Hashanah. And we will say Eshet Chayil. It says to say these quietly. That's a little bit of a debate in terms of how that goes. So we are going to say Kiddush. We're going to say the special prayer over wine or juice, grape juice. And we will include the little insertion, Yom HaShishi, on the sixth day, God created the heavens and the earth and all their array, etc. We will add that short paragraph. And then we also will say Ashrae. Now, let me say one thing about that. If you are confused, if you live alone, etc., I would refer you back to a little bit more in-depth video that I did. Right here, I'm giving you an overview, but I went a little bit more in depth on the evening prayer, etc. And I can refer you to that. Basically, if you're going to be the same person lighting the candles and saying the Kiddush, then you really should say the Shechachianu over the Kiddush. If that went over your head, don't worry about it. You can check my video later. Blessing and prayer over apple and honey after washing and eating challah. And so there's a little bit of a debate here. My custom or my recommendation is to take an apple, dip it in honey, go ahead and say your blessing, eat it, go ahead and say a little meditation for having a sweet new year. I'll go ahead and link a handout from Beth Emanuel in the description down here as well. And then go wash and eat for challah if it is your custom to wash. And the reason why is because when we eat bread, that usually covers the entire meal. There's some debate amongst the sages in terms of how that works. So just to sidestep all of that, I say you eat your apple and honey, your beautiful apple and honey first, and then you can go ahead and eat your bread. Now, at this point, I do want to talk about the Rosh Hashanah menu. So let's go ahead and step outside from here, and we'll go over back to Beth Emanuel's section right here. So there, I think is, let's see here. I think it's definitely going, right here, the Rosh Hashanah menu. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. This is the PDF that I was talking about. So on the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, we're praying to God. We're really begging our Creator to allow us to have a good, sweet year, as we say in Psalm 6, that we want life, but we don't want it through harsh rebuke or harsh punishment. Instead, we want life, and we want Hashem to teach us and guide us in everything that we need to do for the upcoming year, but not with pain and sorrow, but with the proper kind of chastisement as a loving father, but to have sweetness and abundance, etc. So it has become the custom all the way from the times of the Gemara, a couple hundred years after the times of Yeshua and the apostles, to it's a very ancient custom, hundreds and hundreds of years old, to eat special kinds of fruits and special kinds of foods that have anything that's in them that's sweet, or has anything in them that's talking about being at the head of the year. You see a fish head over here. And so this is a fantastic lecture here that's all about this, but let's just go ahead and take a look at this PDF, and I want to say a few things about this. So this PDF is all in English. If you're a Hebrew speaker, you probably have this in the Siddur. I know the Art Scroll Siddur and many other Siddurim will have it, and you might have your own customs, etc. If Rosh Hashanah falls on a Friday night, you're going to say these paragraphs, just like we spoke about. And so then you're going to say a special blessing, sanctifying the day. We do it over a cup of wine or grape juice. And here's the suggested traditional text, and then one that's traditional, or suggested, I should say, for gentle and God-fearing Gentile believers. And so then we get to what's known as the Rosh Hashanah Seder. You thought it was just a Pesach Seder, but no. There's a Rosh Hashanah Seder. Seder just meaning order. And so what that really consists of symbolic foods for Rosh Hashanah, like apples dipped in honey, as we talked about. And there's all kinds of things that in English might not really make sense, or maybe your language might not make sense. But however, there's actually an understanding that anything that means sweetness or abundance in any language is a type of fruit that we use as a indicator for a good, sweet new year of abundance. And so all of these things can come with short meditations. May it be your will, Lord our God, the God of our forefathers, that renew for us a good and sweet year. Some people eat raisins and celery, so they can have a raise in celery. Get it? Right. So all kinds of crazy things that people do. And, they eat things with ketchup, so we can catch up to our enemies and catch up to all of our heart's desire, all kinds of crazy things. And so these are some of the ancient things that have to do with, puns and things like that. And you can look in various different Siddurim in terms of why these are traditional foods that are eaten. And so typically this is done either as part of the meal or right before the main meal, but after somebody eats their challah. So again, this is completely optional. And so this is your first year, or this is not your custom, or it's just something that you're not really acquainted with. Don't worry about it. You have a whole under other 364 days. We're praying that you will, to go ahead and learn all about this for next year. All right, let's go ahead and move on now. Let's go back to going through the Chabad document right here, and we're now getting to the actual morning itself. Now, one thing I do want to say is that we have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Let me go ahead and exit out of this very quickly just to go ahead and show you here. Let's see here. There is an article. Nope, it's not here. I think these are all the audio lectures. There is an article in here, and it probably talks about, let's see, maybe it could be down here. Yeah, doubling holidays are two heads better than one. And so it talks about why would Rosh Hashanah be 2 years, etc. And so that's something that you can look at later. Okay, so I am seeing that I got a message for somebody, so I'm going to go ahead and check my message here and see if there's a question. So the person was talking about blowing the shofar, asking about blowing the shofar, so we'll talk about that in just a moment. And so being that the holiday is doubled, let's go back over here now to our outline kind of here in Chabad. Whoops, press the wrong button. Here we go. There we go. Did it again. All right, let's go ahead and make my screen a little bit brighter. And there we go. Now we got the right button. So Shacharit for Shabbat on Rosh Hashanah, and then we're going to have Shacharit, the morning prayers, for the order of the day for Sunday as well, because Rosh Hashanah is going to be 2 days. Now, being that the first day is on Shabbat, there are many observances that we actually refrain from. And I'll say something very quickly about that, but then I'll go ahead and post a few articles down here in the description as to why that is. So the first thing is we're very, very careful with all of the prohibitions and restrictions on Shabbat. And one of the prohibitions and restrictions is to carry. And we don't carry out in a public square on Shabbat. Of course, you can carry in your own home, etc. We don't carry from a public square, especially not from a private dwelling into the public square, public thoroughfare, etc. So because that's the case, the rabbis had said, you know what, let's go ahead and ease the observance of blowing the shofar. So in fact, we do not blow the shofar on Saturday at all. We're not allowed to touch the shofar even for those amongst us who are Jewish and or wanting to observe that high standard of some of the restrictions along with the Jewish people. And so that's one change. Another change is that we're going to see that there are certain blessings and there's certain prayers that might be actually very representative and symbolic of the Rosh Hashanah period that we actually don't say on Shabbat. Don't say on Shabbat. The reason why is because Shabbat is a day of celebration where we don't want to ask and think about our own needs. Instead, we want to focus on the coming kingdom that will one day be all Shabbat, be the day the Shekulo Shabbat. There will be all Shabbat, all peace, serenity, etc. This is what we're looking forward to. So on Shabbat, we have a foretaste of that. We put our own needs aside as much as possible and only focus on a relationship with God, a relationship with one another. So is the custom here to recite fill as much of the day as possible with reciting, let's say, Tehillim with Psalms. So there are people that finish the whole book of Psalms. They finish it multiple times during the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. There are the days that are, the prayers that are the normal sections, not to go through all of those. And then skipping all those sections, let's look at the next section is the Shema and Its Blessings. Now, you do have a Shabbat version. There are a couple extra hymns that we sang on Shabbat, not necessarily things that can be skipped. The Amidah for Shabbat and the Amidah for Rosh Hashanah with the Shabbat insertions. That would be the next part of the morning services. And then we do not say the Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, that nice haunting melody that a lot of us might be familiar with or grew up with. We actually don't say that. The reason why is because that prayer is a bunch of requests for our needs, the needs of our families and our communities and our nation, or all of our nations, the world. And since we don't ask for our own personal needs, as we just talked about, or the needs of the nations of the world, etc., on Shabbat, we're going to skip that on Shabbat. So then it would be followed with the song of the day, whichever day that is. So obviously Shabbat, so it will be Psalm 92. We will go ahead and follow that up with a special high holiday psalm, which is Psalm 27. And then we'll do the Torah reading for the day. Now, the Torah reading, you might be by yourself. You might be in a place where there's not a quorum of people. So it's still really to be in rhythm with the order of the day and the suggested order from the men of the Great Assembly, prophets, etc., from hundreds of years ago, hundreds of years before our Master Yeshua and all the apostles. This order, this rhythm was already given down. And so I would recommend, even if you're by yourself, to go ahead and read from the Torah. Now, if it's too much for you, if you have screaming children running around, circles around you, whatever the case is, or if it's too much of a service, too long of a service, it's something that obviously can be skipped. But there's such rich high holiday and Rosh Hashanah themes in the readings. So the readings are very simple. It's for the first day, it's Genesis 21, and for the second day, Genesis 22. Genesis 21, speaking about the the uh, the promise, that the fulfillment of the promise that God gave to Abraham and Sarah with the birth of Isaac, and the whole kind of rocky situation, the rocky test that Abraham had with Ishmael, with Ishmael, and with Hagar, and Sarah's maidservant. And so then that leads into Genesis 22, which is the commandment of the binding and sacrificing, perhaps, of Isaac. So if you wanted to know more about that, we have a daily Parsha study, actually, we do every morning. I'll put a link to that down here as well. And so we always welcome anybody who wants to come and learn the Parsha with us. It's at 8 a.m. Sunday through Thursday, or excuse me, Sunday through Friday, 8 a.m. Central Standard Time. You're more than welcome. So let's go ahead now and go to the next section. And so that would be the Haftorah for the day. So this Haftorah is actually going to be, let's see if I can, there we go. This Haftorah, the reading, the section for the prophets is going to be the Song of Hannah. And so this is Hannah and the barren woman Hannah that's in the temple, and she's praying for a son, and she has a son Samuel. So I'll go ahead and link I'll put in the description a link to all of these readings, actually, that you can go ahead and see. Now, because it's Shabbat, the shofar is not blown until tomorrow, meaning Sunday. And then you're going to have Ashrae, the prayer, Psalm 145, and then you're going to have the Musaf, the additional prayer for Shabbat and Rosh Hashanah. And this is a rather long section, a rather long prayer. And so it definitely would behoove you to read up a little bit on here as well, to look through this, and then you can go ahead and look at another source I'm going to give you in just a moment. So then Kiddush for Shabbat and Rosh Hashanah day is going to have, some people have the custom of saying Psalm 23 before they make the special Kiddush. The special Kiddush can be something as simple as Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Blessed you, Lord God, King of the universe, who created the fruit of the vine, all the way to many, many insertions for Shabbat, etc. So it's a little bit of choose your own adventure there. And the day Kiddush here, the sanctification of God's name, is, I believe here, it does include the section for Rosh Hashanah. I'm turning to there now. Yes, it does. Looks like, and that's going to be, if you have a Shulchan Shabbat, if you have the Sabbath table, it's going to be published by FFOZ, First Fruits of Zion. You're going to see the different sections for Shabbat, and then there's also boxes that are kind of like grayed out boxes where it will have some special additions for Rosh Hashanah. And so, like I said, it can be anything from Berei Pri Hagafen, the simple creator of the fruit of the vine, all the way to all of those additions. So that would be Kiddush. Then in the afternoon, we're going to say a couple more prayers. You would have the Ashrae Prayer, which is Psalm 145, Uba L'Tzion, which means it's a prayer conglomeration of different psalms and things like that, where we declare God holy, 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 and we bless God whose glory fills the whole earth, etc. Of the Anit Pilati. This is a section, and I don't have. Yeah, I do have my Machzor here, so I can go through this with you. And Avianit Filati is going to be said because it's on Shabbat, and so that is a section. That is a verse that's coming from the Psalms. I'll go ahead and tell you in just a moment where that's coming from. Sorry, the prayers are very, very long in my Machzor, and so I'm just turning there. Let's see if I can get there in time. Here it is. And that is a line from Psalm 69, verse 14. As for me, my prayer to you, Hashem, may be at the favorable time, etc. And then we're going to have another Torah reading. Now, this Torah reading is actually going to be the same Torah reading that we're going to have next Saturday. And so we read a couple sections. I'll go ahead and link to that as well. And we have the special Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah Amidah. And we do not say Avinu Malkeinu again because, of the same reason we mentioned above. We say Psalm 27, Aleinu, and whew, that's a lot already. That's a full day of communing with the Creator, a full day of prayers, etc., concentration, begging God for another year of life, etc. Now, there is a custom called Tashlich. Tashlich means casting, where symbolically we cast our sins into a body of water. The body of water can be something as simple as a pond all the way to an ocean, but it does halachically need to have some kind of fish in it. And now this is something that can be done. It's a custom, and so, but it's a very, very important custom, very meaningful custom for people to do. And there's certain psalms that certain verses that we say that go along with this, etc. And from the book of Joel and different places. And so this can actually be done all the way right up until before Shmini Atzeret, 8th day of the Sukkot festival. So it's most auspicious to do it on Rosh Hashanah itself, and so we don't do it on Shabbat for the same reason we don't carry out the shofar to different locations. We're not going to carry our prayer book, etc. There are those people I do know that do say it. Obviously, be careful not to carry, a prayer book, etc. However, it's common custom to skip it on Shabbat. So now we have essentially the same thing for the next day. I'll go a little bit quicker now, pick up the pace. And so we see we do not have the receiving ceremony, receiving Shabbat, KOLLEL'S Shabbat. And so instead we have the Shema, we have the Amidah, the special Rosh Hashanah Amidah. There is one thing that we're going to do. We're going to have an insertion to the Yanu, which is going to be the insertion of a paragraph separating between the Rosh Hashanah that falls on Shabbat and the Rosh Hashanah day that doesn't. So the simplest thing that somebody would need to say is Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh, who separates between holy and holy, distinguishes between holy and holy. And that simple phrase said with intention, etc., obviously, to separate between the holiness of Shabbat and the holiness of the second day of Rosh Hashanah is actually enough to make that distinction as well. We're going to say the David Mizmor, Psalm 24, Aleinu, and there we go. That is the evening section for Rosh Hashanah. We're going to do the same candle lighting. However, as you can see, there's the recommendation of placing a new fruit. We mentioned that earlier. And there also is the Havdalah. So how does Havdalah work? So if this is something that you're familiar with, etc., I'll go ahead and talk a little bit briefly about that. So Havdalah basically for Rosh Hashanah, ending Shabbat, when it's still a holiday, has two prayers. So the first prayer is going to be on the candles. And so since we've lit holiday candles. One just basically needs to look at the candles, say, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, creator of the illumination of the fire, Borei Borei Ha'esh," and simply look at the candles. And the second one is going to be over a cup of wine. But that's actually what we're doing in the Kiddush. So really only one person needs to say the Borei Borei Ha'esh, and also the separation prayer. The separation prayer again is Baruch Atah Hashem, bless you, Lord God, Hamavdil ben Kodesh LaKodesh, who distinguishes between holy and holy. And so then we pretty much have the same things that we saw before. And there are some people that do the Rosh Hashanah Seder of the second night, or some people do not. And now we get to pretty much all the same things for that we saw previously with the prayer services on the day, except there are two different additions now. So the first is after the Amidah the Rosh Hashanah Amidah, we now do say the Avinu Malkeinu, and asking for our needs, for the needs of our community, our families, our nation, etc. We will say the song of the day, etc., and the Torah reading for the second day, and then the sounding of the shofar. So now this is something I want to park on a little bit, because obviously this is the Inyana de Yoma, the idea, the whole crux of the day is the sounding of the shofar. Now, where do we get this idea from to sound the shofar? Well, you might ask and say, okay, I don't understand. Where do we get shofar? This is Yom HaZikaron, a day of remembrance, or Yom Teruah, a day of shouting or making music or something like that. Well, one of the Psalms that we say is actually Psalm 47. I'm just going to look this up really quickly here in with Rabbi Google and BibleGateway.com. And the first time, a little bit of trivia, you can ask your friends, the first time that actually we see the word shofar is in connection with, where did Rosh Hashanah come from? Remember, it's not one of the Jewish holidays that's listed. In the first place we see Jewish holidays listed, where did it come from? The sin of the golden calf. And that's indeed where we see the first place that ever in the Bible it mentions a shofar. It mentions it in Exodus 19, that the blast of the shofar grew louder and louder as God descended on the mountain with his laser light show and fire and smoke and all that. But the question is that, okay, well, where do we understand that Yom Teruah, the day of Teruah really just means something like making noise, joyful noise, etc. So you might say maybe it's playing any instrument, or you say maybe it's just joyful singing. That's what Teruah means. So unfortunately, you're not going to get it into English, but we'll definitely look down here, and we'll see that the word there is a word talking about Teruah in verse 5. God is ascended with a shout, and that word is Teruah, the Lord with the sound of a trumpet. And what's that in Hebrew? You guessed it, shofar. So the rabbis understand from this verse here that this connection between Yom HaTeruah and the shofar and the imagery in connection with judgment from Mount Sinai, etc., as we mentioned before previously at the beginning, the top of our hour, all that gets mixed into one, and talking about the shofar. Now, another connection that I want to go ahead and make is from this wonderful, amazing website, and it's Tanakh.org. Tanakh.org is a website put out by Rabbi Menachem Leibtag. It's, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years old. And I will go ahead and link this down here as well. If you look at one of his articles on what's called the Yamim Noraim, the Days of Awe, he has a wonderful, an amazing article on Rosh Hashanah Yom Teruah, where he asks the question, to our surprise, the holiday that we call, read the abstract here, Rosh Hashanah is never referred to as such in Chumash, in the five books of the Bible, first 5 books of the Bible. In fact, Chumash tells us very little about this holiday, which we are to celebrate on the first day of the 7th month. How do we know that it's indeed a day of judgment, and that it marks the beginning of the new year? In the following shiur, in the following lesson, we attempt to answer the question from within the text of the Chumash itself. So this is definitely an article not for the uninitiated. It's definitely a more advanced article that has a lot of Hebrew, etc. But I will link that as well in the description. Just to go ahead and look really briefly at the article here, I wanted to point out just a couple things. This is an article I pretty much like to learn every year. And let's see, he points to, if I can find it, the agricultural year, the end of the agricultural year. And let's see if I can find the section in Deuteronomy that he points to in the Varim. And this is, yeah, here it is. He says, it is a land which the Lord looks after. God's eyes constantly look after it. Mereshit Hashanah, from the beginning of the year until the end of the year. That's the Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 12. And he goes on and talks more about Reshit Hashanah. And then he also talks about it as a time of a critical time of judgment, etc. And also talks about it being a special month of Yom Teruah, and goes into a little bit there too about how Yom Teruah in the Bible has a connection with the Shofar. So it's an amazing, amazing article. I highly recommend it. But again, it's not for the uninitiated because there are a lot of Hebrew terms, etc. It might take you a little bit to get through it. But hey, why not go over it on Rosh Hashanah, especially if you're going to be by yourself? I want to go ahead and go back to the order of the day here and mention a couple more things here. Let's see here. So as somebody is going to blow the shofar, there are, let's see here. Hold on if I can see it. Where did it go? Um, excuse me. There is an order of the day. There is an order of the day, and there are several verses. I don't see it here, but that's okay. So let's go back actually now to looking at our website over here about these high holidays. And here's something I really want to go ahead and very highly publicized because I think it's very helpful. If you are somebody that is new to Rosh Hashanah, new to liturgical prayer, even new, or you're just not somebody who's prayed a lot without, a congregation, a synagogue, um, or other people around, well, this is a very short kind of companion to the prayer book, which on its own can definitely be prayed. And so let's go ahead and take a look and see how this is laid out. Let's see, we'll download the booklet option here on the mirrored pages. And so essentially what this is this has, you know what, I don't want to do it this way. Let's do it a different way. Let's do the standard layout here. And we'll go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. We'll magnify that, and then we'll go ahead and go through this a little bit here. And so essentially what you're going to see is that this is very, very short, 45 pages. And so you might, oh my gosh, 45 pages, like reading a book. Actually, there's a lot of white spaces, etc. So if you're not familiar with liturgical prayer, it goes pretty quickly. But the thing is, this really has all the highlights. Let's go ahead and take a look at the table of contents. So it has the evening Rosh Hashanah prayers. It has Rosh Hashanah greetings, etc. It has the hymns for Friday evening. It has the daytime Kiddush for Rosh Hashanah. And then the Rosh Hashanah prayers really just start with the Shema. It starts with the Shema, the Amidah. It has the Avinu Malkeinu, which we obviously don't say on Shabbat, as we talked about before. It has the order of the blowing of the shofar. It has the Musaf, the additional prayer for Rosh Hashanah. Now, it does have all of the cantors, the Chazan's repetitions, the prayer leader's repetitions, but obviously those are all skipped if one is praying by him or herself. And it has the Tashlich, it has the conclusion of Rosh Hashanah, everything you need. And it's actually very, very user-friendly. It is, let's go ahead and skip down here, it has some information at the beginning, and it has obviously a lot of notes you can look through. But as you can see, it's on partially in Hebrew, and then partially it's going to be in English. And you can see how they published here with some grayed out sections speaking about Shabbat, etc. And here are some of the Shabbat sections that you could read in terms of the hymns in the evening, and then Rosh Hashanah, which occurs on Saturday night. So here you have the blessings of what's known as Havdalah, the blessing of separation that we talked about between first day and the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Beautiful, beautiful, amazing. So this is something I would also commend to you that I'll put down in the links. Now, I want to look at one more section, which kind of is a little bit of guide, and this is kind of the least you need to know. So it has some of the greetings here, and where we greet each other to be written and sealed for good. And there's also a little bit of a longer greeting, Lashana Tova Tikatev V'Tichateim, it should be written and sealed for a good new year. And so it talks about Ma'ariv and Kiddush. We went over those things. And so now we get to the blast of the shofars. This is something I actually want to go ahead and park on for just a little bit. Now, how do we understand the blast of the shofar? So the blasts of the shofar really are contained in 3 blasts. The first is a tekiah. And so a tekiah is a biblical blast. We see that in the Bible. And, let's go ahead and preface our remarks about the shofar. If you were an ancient Israelite and you were going shofar shopping, where would you go? Would you go to the local Judaica store? Would you go to maybe a store that sells musical instruments? In fact, you would go to the Army surplus store. Why the Army surplus store? Because that actually is what the shofar is used for. It's a weapon, or not a weapon, excuse me. It's an instrument. It's a tool that's used to go ahead and tell the army when to charge, when to halt, when to move forward, when to retreat, etc., as we see in the book of Numbers in chapter 9. And so the idea of the shofar is obviously just a ritual item that we use now. We use it ritually, but in fact, it's really supposed to be an instrument of war. And that's essentially what we're doing with the sound of the shofar. We're declaring war. We're declaring war against really 2 things. Number 1, the enemy of our soul and all the enemies of our soul, in spiritual places, obviously, but also the war that we have inside of us. That's those voices, the committee that we have in our head that says, you're such a this, you always do that, you never do this, etc. They say if somebody talked to you like you talk to yourself, you'd want to punch them in the mouth. So this is the war within, the inner struggle, the inner battle, or the battle we have for just wanting to have the most pleasure now, the battle we have with delaying gratification, with serving somebody greater than I am, being a part of something greater than I am, being other-centered, all these internal struggles and battles. The shofar is meant to go ahead and wake us up and call us to battle. But there's a second meaning, there's a second use of the shofar. The shofar, all the shofar sounds are supposed to be sounds of crying, sounds of crying out to Hashem, to our Creator, cries that are deep inside of us and that are getting our deepest emotions, our deepest sentiments out, and crying out that we should have a better year, that we should please beg God to be inscribed for a good new year, to be here 364 days from now. All these things are wrapped up into this ancient, very primitive instrument that we're playing. Now, I have good news and bad news for you. The good news is that it's very easy to go ahead and make blasts in the shofar. I should say very easy, but to get something out, it might not sound pretty, but look, I can do it even with my hand. Okay, so imagine I have an extension right here. And so basically the way that you do it is by closing your lips and having them vibrate like that. There are some videos that you can watch, etc. But the bad news is that it needs to be heard. It needs to physically be heard. And so the reason why is because the sages talk about an echo. Can you hear an echo of the shofar? Or can you hear something that is not the actual sound itself? And so that would obviously translate to a digital sound. Now, if you're somebody that's not from any Jewish descent, well, you don't really have the obligation to hear a shofar. on the day of Rosh Hashanah. So I would recommend maybe listening to something if that's your custom to use electronics, to not be unplugged. If it's your custom to use electronics over Rosh Hashanah or over Shabbat, maybe to listen to the sound of the shofar. It's meant to wake us up. It's meant to call us. But really, those sentiments can be expressed even if one doesn't have a shofar. Those sentiments can really be expressed to God, and even how much more so that here I am all by myself, that I don't have a community to be with, or I can't be with a community because of whatever restrictions or circumstances, and to cry out to God, how much more so. But there's a third thing that the sound, the blast of the shofar is doing, and that really is coronating God as king. See, because God wanted to create a world, so to speak. He wanted, so to speak, to create a world. Why? Not because he's high-fiving the angels up there. Oh, somebody called me the king of the universe. No, it's because he wanted to give. But he knows that the only way that we're going to have the best life, have our best life now, is by recognizing and paying allegiance to his sovereignty. Because he's the one that loves us the most. He loves you to pieces. What's the picture on God's wallet when he opens his wallet up? It's your picture right there. And because of that, we're coordinating the king by blasting the shofar. Now, how many blasts, how does it work, etc. There are videos I'm going to go ahead and give to you, and again in the description right here. But I want to go ahead and just basically show you there are three sets of three blasts. Well, really two sets of three blasts, one set of four blasts. And so the way that it works is that there are 30 blasts as a minimum. And actually, I did see that there is one source that says that you could even do 10 blasts as a minimum. So the blasts are like this. So there's a tekiah, right? And then there's what we call a shavarim, a broken blast, right? And then we have the alternating kind of ACDC alarm clock type blast. I'm not so good at it. And then we end that with a long blast. So though we do those three times, three sets of those. Sorry about that. Excuse me. I don't know if I swallowed something wrong or what, but sorry about my voice. So then we have a second set of three, which would be the long blast, and then the broken three blast, and then a third blast, and then a final set of three that would be the long blast, and it would be the alarm clock alternating blast, and then the long blast there. Now, what about a woman blowing shofar? So you might say, what's the problem with a woman blowing shofar? Well, women are not obligated in mitzvot that are bound to time. The reason why, just very quickly, is just that if you think about a woman that would have to be obligated, well, women as a rule in general, not every woman of course, but as a woman in general are raising the next generation. And so you can imagine a woman with, three kids running in circles around her, and all of a sudden somebody knocks on her door. Okay, so you have to come to our prayer minion. You have to come to our prayer service. Yeah, but I got my three kids. Sorry, you got to come. You're going to complete the 10th person. So the rabbis, in order to have the kindness to women, said, you know what? We are going to make all of these things optional for women. So because that they're optional, then women would there's a little bit of a different custom in terms of whether they would say the blessing or not, but women can definitely blow on their behalf and on behalf of other women, and men can of course blow on their behalf as well because they are obligated. Jewish men are obligated, but Jewish women are not obligated to blow So they were not able to blow on behalf of men who are obligated, because they can't fulfill their obligation because women are not obligated. The same, I would say, with Gentiles and Jews as well, that Gentiles who are not obligated to these things, can opt in to do them, in concert with the Jewish people, in praise and praise to God, and in unification with our Master Yeshua, who want to adopt these observances, which I think is rightfully is the right thing for them to do, cannot blast the shofar on behalf of Jewish men. So the question is, can somebody practice the shofar? So you may practice blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and even you may practice. I heard that you may practice also on Friday afternoon. However, we don't do it liturgically on Friday morning in the prayer service. And so we already talked about a new fruit. We talked about some of the symbolic foods, etc. And let's see, Tashlich we talked about. And we also we haven't gotten to the end of Rosh Hashanah, but this will be the end now of what we're talking about. And so I don't know if there's anybody here on live with us. If there are, can go ahead and take some questions. I know we have one person live with us over here on Zoom, and if you have any questions, you can feel free to type them in the chat, or you can feel free to go ahead and ask, and I'm happy to go ahead and entertain some live questions here. Okay, and if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the comments section, either on this Facebook if you're watching on Facebook, or you can feel free to go ahead and email me directly. Israel, just like the country, Israel, Amic, AMIC, like amicable, friendly, Israel Amic at gmail.com. Israel, just like the country, Amic, like amicable, AMIC at gmail.com. So without any questions, here's what I want to do. I want to end today with, or tonight I should say, I want to end with a blessing, and really to talk a little bit about what's happening this year. What's happening this year with COVID, with everything that we're going through. Sorry, I'm just going to clean up my desktop a little bit here. What's happening with COVID, with everything that we're going through. And as you can understand, what we're doing, let's see, I'm setting up my, there we go. I'm a little perfectionist about these things. What's happening with COVID, what's happening with Hashem and our place in it. So the word for the coronavirus, corona, meaning obviously in Latin, a crown. And if you look at the virus, it looks a little bit like a crown, etc., etc. But here we have the crown, the little miniature crown that's turned the whole entire world upside down. But really, the crown of the king, the true king, that's who we're looking to crown. And so in this world, you really, I think, have two crowns. You can take the crown from the creator, the sovereign, who you owe your allegiance, your very life to. You can take that crown down and maybe try and put it on your own head. But perhaps the little teeny crown that's going to possibly destroy society. When we do that, when we crown ourselves, we see that unfortunately can destroy societies, it can destroy governments, it can destroy economies. It really can destroy ourselves. We can lose our lives, God forbid. But when we crown the true king, that ultimately is when we're going to see the ultimate salvation with the coming of Mashiach, the coming of the Messiah, B'marav b'yameinu, speedily in our days. And everybody said, Amen. Thank you so much for joining me, whether you watch this live on Facebook, or if you're live on Zoom, or if you're watching the recording of this. As always, if you have any questions, please go ahead and you can contact me on my social media. israelamic@gmail.com is my email, and I run an organization, Virtual KOLLEL. You can go ahead and and type virtual kollel. I'll have a link down in the description, of course. You can email me there, and you can contact me through Beth Emanuel, who I'm sure you're probably affiliated with if you're watching this video. Or if you're just on YouTube, you can go ahead and comment there. Have a great day in every way. Have a healthy, happy, sweet New Year. Lashana Tova Tikatevu. That you should be written and inscribed for a good, sweet New Year. Mashiach now. That we should have our Messiah King come now. Amen. Amen.